Welcome everybody to our webinar on the orientation to the Phoenix change file issue. This is not for distribution. This is a confidential briefing session for you. On the line with us in the computer, we have local leaders, component regional vice presidents, stewards, pay advocates. So we welcome everybody and thank you very much for joining us. Just going to reiterate that you have all been muted, so you cannot, if you are trying to speak, it will not work. We have overall control of the mute function, so you are muted. There are certain times during the presentation where we will actually ask for questions. At that time, we welcome you to either put up your hand in the hand box, or to type in a question, or to type in the chat box those questions, and we will try and go through those as much as possible at the same time, recognizing that we only have 60 minutes for the webinar this evening. Okay, so what we're going to review with you this evening, and I do notice that the presentation's not up again, so I know they're working on that. So what we are going to cover with you this evening is the dues process for the core public service, how Phoenix affected this process, what needs to be corrected, and how and when this will unfold, the process that PSAC has put in place to respond to members' questions, our key messages, and when I say our key messages, I mean the PSAC key messages that we have in regards to Phoenix. We also have 3 demands. So we're now on slide number 2. And some tools for leaders and members to answer the questions about this process. You're also going to be hearing from our national president, Chris Ayward, this evening. We have a recorded message from him, and then I am going to be turning the presentation after that to Mark Paycheck. Mark Paycheck is our director of the regional office branch, and that's the gentleman sitting beside me here in the room. So if we're ready, we can now hear a message from Chris Ayward.
Hi. I want to begin by personally thanking you for volunteering your time to help PSAC members through their Phoenix pay problems. For several years, the Phoenix payroll system has not only disrupted our members' pay, but has also been collecting incorrect amounts of membership dues. After a lengthy delay, the government has brought changes to its system that allows for the correct amount in dues to be paid. Roughly 40,000 PSAC members are owed a refund, and nearly 111,000 are in arrears and must make additional payments. PSAC will refund any amount owed as a result of errors in the Phoenix pay system within 1 to 2 paychecks. The well-being of our members is our top priority, and therefore PSAC has policies in place to protect members who are in arrears from facing financial hardship. We will only collect arrears in small payments over several paychecks at a rate equal to twice the correct monthly dues rate. And we will only collect the equivalent of 1 year's worth of dues from a member, even if they owe more. PSAC will also consider longer repayment schedules for members who are facing extreme financial difficulty on a case-by-case basis. Our priority remains getting our members paid correctly, and that includes making sure the employer makes the proper deductions every payday. Thank you for taking the time today to learn more about the membership dues and how this will impact our members on November 14th and beyond. Thank you.
So that was a message from our national president, Chris Ayward. If you do have questions, again, just to let you know that you can put them in the chat box or the question box, and we will take them at the appropriate time. At this time, I still have more to say, actually. So I'm going to provide you with a brief reminder about union dues and explain how the PSAC receives and distributes those monies. There is a Treasury Board directive on union dues, which sets out the administration of dues for the core public service. Our members' collective agreements also include an article on the union dues checkoff provision. Now, what's important to realize here is it is the employer's responsibility for deducting the dues from employees who are represented by the PSAC and to remit those dues to the PSAC. Ensuring that members pay the correct dues is the work of our PSAC membership branch, and that administration team, with the assistance of Unionware, which is the software that we use, manages this whole process. Union dues can either be a set percentage or a specific dollar amount paid by union members to the union. And where it is a percentage rate, those dues are applied against the first step of a member's classification and level. So if you're an AS1 step 4, your dues are actually calculated at an AS1 step 1. Union dues fund services to members, and it's with the dues that we can actually offer labor education, provide services throughout the country, and the regional offices through the regional office, and we can defend members, grievances, arbitration, and bargaining negotiations. There is a pie chart of where your union dues actually go, and this is how they are used. So you can see national convention, negotiations, representation, union campaigns, communication. This is all how the union dues are divided up and distributed. Dues are distributed between 3 sets. You have your local amount, you have your component amount, and the PSAC amount. All of these dues are set either at the local AGM, the component triennial convention, or the PSAC triennial convention. For the core public service, there's a monthly sharing of data between the employer and the union. Employee data such as your classification, your level, and hours of work is provided to the PSAC by the employer. And the employer also shares the number of dues these employees have paid. These files are then loaded into our database, which is called Unionware, and this system verifies that the appropriate dues have been deducted and paid to the PSAC. If these numbers match, the dues owed equals dues paid, we simply log the information about the dues into the Unionware profile. If there is a gap, that means there's a problem. And at that point in time, Unionware actually flags that member's file. Unionware then determines the correct amount that should have been paid and makes any subsequent adjustments that may be required. If the member has not paid the full amount of union dues they owe, this appears as an arrears. If the member has overpaid union dues, this appears as a refund. This information is also recorded into the member's Unionware profile. Information about amending dues and requesting either an arrears or a refund to be actioned by the employer, because don't forget it's the employer who actually does this work, is then logged onto a file that is then shared with the employer. This is called the change file, which is why this presentation is called the change file. Given the many changes that can happen within an employee's work situation, there are frequent adjustments that need to be made to an individual. And these changes are acting assignments, changes in classification, changes in hours of work, transfers to a department, an agency. When you transfer, sometimes you also change component, you change local, and sometimes you even go and join a different union depending upon the job. Before Phoenix was activated, the change file normally generated actions for about 10,000 to 15,000 members each month. Are there any questions at this time on what we have covered to date? In the chat box. Okay. Yeah, not seeing any questions at this present time. I'm now very pleased to hand over the presentation to Mark. Mark, you're on.
Thanks, Stephanie. So that's the way the change file operates or works. And then Phoenix happened. And unfortunately, obviously the tape or the information that we would normally provide to the employer was not being inputted. And that resulted in a number of issues. As Stephanie pointed out, there are a number of events that had, that changed members' union dues, the rates that they pay, and that information was not inputted into the change tape. So what basically occurred is any new employee who was hired after March 2016, their dues were frozen at a basic default rate of $40 per month. So that is kind of the default. If we don't have any data, members are deducted, there's a $40 deduction from their pay. The average PSAC member pays about $80. That's the average rate. Members who are paying higher dues because of acting positions, there were no dues decreases if they returned to their substantive positions after March 2016. So they would have continued to pay dues at that higher rate. Members who began acting assignments to a higher paid position after March 2016 were not paying the appropriate amount of dues. Members who changed jobs after March 2016, there were no adjustments brought to their union dues. So obviously this resulted to a number of changes that we were not able to advise the employer of and capture through the change file. So essentially this affects members who are who work for Treasury Board, the Canada Revenue Agency, the Office of the Auditor General, Library of Parliament, the CSC, so the Communication Security Establishment, Parks Canada, SSHRC, and the Canada Food Inspection Agency. It also means that any of the salary increases that were negotiated in previous rounds of bargaining have not been implemented. So this has resulted in, not being able to collect the appropriate amount of dues for basically 30 months. We estimate that there's about $15 to $20 million in uncollected dues. Obviously, we're not going to recuperate all of that money. We're not going to recuperate all of that money from the membership. And we've initiated a number of actions to recuperate that money from the employer through some court actions. We've also gotten advances on dues from the employer, but there's still a significant shortfall in the amount of dues that we should have collected during that period of time. And those somewhat should be corrected as a result of the change file being implemented. So basically what's going to happen is we've had discussions with Treasury Board on an ongoing basis, basically since March 2016, and we've advised the employer that we didn't think Phoenix would be able to kind of marry with our software in order to be able to advise the employer of any changes. And in spite of that, the employer's repeated assurances that it would, effectively it did not. As we saw, there were a number of issues related to Phoenix, and the collection of dues was one of those. We have been able to work with PWGSC to ensure that the change file will be operational. We've done a couple of tests, kind of beta tested in a safe environment to ensure that the change file will be operational, that the Phoenix system will be able to read the change file and will be able to implement those changes and implement the correct dues rates effective November 14th, 2018. So that the changes should start to be implemented as of November 14th, 2018, and members will start seeing changes on their paychecks as of the pay period beginning November 14th. So members will see arrears or they will see refunds depending on the situations that they're in. If they have not paid the correct amount of dues, they'll be in arrears. If they've overpaid, they'll be receiving refunds. So as I said, once that's activated and as of the pay period of November 14th, members will start seeing changes on their paycheck. Arrears will be deducted from some of our members, those who have not paid sufficient dues, and refunds will be paid out to members who have paid, more dues than they should have paid during that period of time. So we estimate, based on our figures of March 2018, that nearly 95,000 members owe dues arrears of $300 or less. Close to 12,000 members owe union dues and arrears between $300 and $600. Over 3,000 members owe union dues arrears between $600 and $900. And finally, over 1,300 members owe more than $900. So There's a significant amount of members who are going to be impacted by this. Fortunately, the vast majority, the figures will be fairly low. It'll be less than $300, but there will be some members who will have, to recoup a pretty significant amount of dues. As I said, about 1,300 who owe over $900. We expect, obviously, that there'll be a number of questions from our members. Some members obviously won't be pleased at seeing that that they owe dues, that they owe back dues because they weren't paying dues correctly during that period of time. But there are also members who will be receiving refunds. So based on the information we had, again, on in March 2018, there are about 37,000 members who are owed less than $300. Over 1,300 members are owed between $300 and $600. About 200 members are owed between $600 and $900, and about 100 members are owed more than $900 from the union. So I guess the first question and members are going to ask is, so why do they have to pay arrears if Phoenix was not their responsibility? And of course, they're right. It's not their fault. It's not the PSAC's fault that dues were not properly collected. It's as a result of the Phoenix pay system. We've all seen the disasters that occurred as a result of Phoenix. People being underpaid, overpaid, and obviously the dues collection is one of those problems that are related to Phoenix. We've repeatedly told governments, told the employer that the system would be a failure, was a failure. We took a number of measures to try and mitigate the negative impacts of Phoenix on our members, such as negotiating mechanisms with the employer so our members would get emergency pay, ensuring that if members incurred interest costs or other costs related to Phoenix, that they were reimbursed those costs. So we've done a number of measures to try and mitigate those circumstances. And at some point we need to, kind of put the clock back at zero and reset the dues. And we're doing that as of November 14th. So we're hoping that moving forward, the system will be, as I said, be able to collect the correct amount of dues on an ongoing basis. It's important to point out as well that the changes to the dues that are being made now would have occurred earlier in this system if Phoenix had been working properly. This isn't as a result of an increase in dues, it's a result of dues not being collected for that extended period of time. So are there any questions at this point?
Anne-Marie Frison has a verbal question. So Anne-Marie Frison, I have unmuted you if you'd like to ask your question. Sorry, I'm Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, I have muted you if you'd like to ask your question at this time. Anne-Marie, are you there?
Hello, my question is, what about members who are no longer in the service because of retirement?
Yeah, so I got her question. So she was asking, I'm not sure if everybody else got it. She was asking, what about people who have retired? So so for members who are no longer active, they should be advising. There is a form through PWGSC, and if you go to the PSAC website, you'll see there's frequently asked questions with a link to the PWGSC website where people can provide them with that information. So both, people who have not been paying union dues or people who are not in the system or who have left the system can advise PWGSC of those arrears.
Another question we have is seasonal workers who are off strength, how will they pay and when will they have to, and when they return on strength? So My guess, I'm just going to use Parks Canada. We have a bunch of Parks Canada workers who are seasonal. They pay dues and they don't. So how are we going to be able to calculate those dues?
Yeah. So I would assume once they start paying dues again. So if they're currently not employed, when they come back on strength and start, getting a regular salary and start getting dues deducted, it's at that point that the arrears would start, or refunds would start, because both of those are generated through the pay system. Unfortunately, we can't, or it wouldn't be advisable for us to pay members through a separate process, or to have members, if they wanted to reimburse the full amount by a check, that unfortunately would create more issues, because there's the real possibility that somebody in a pay center would not know that the member had reimbursed the dues, would continue to collect the additional dues, and that would just compound the problem. And also, we want that reflected, or people are going to want to see that reflected in their T4, so it's part of their revenues during that year. And union dues are tax deductible, so people will get obviously those amount if they're in arrears, or if they've gotten refunds. Their T4s will be adjusted in the next fiscal year accordingly. So in terms of those seasonal employees, I would assume once they are back to be employed, they will start seeing those deductions on their pay.
I think I see some other questions, but I know that we will be answering those later on in the presentation. So I think at this point in time, we can continue on, Mark.
Okay, thanks. So how is this all going to work? How are we going to recuperate or refund dues? So in terms of arrears, so members who owe money because they weren't paying the correct dues during that period of time, the amount will be deducted on members' pay and will be double the rate of dues normally deducted from a member's pay until the arrears are fully reimbursed. So for example, if a member pays $80 a month in dues, they'll pay those union dues and an extra $80 in arrears until all of the arrears are paid. So I think people are familiar with the fact that if you pay, $80 per month, you get $40 deducted from your first check and $40 from your second check. What that will look like is people will be paying on their first paycheck their $40 plus $80, and then on the second check they would pay $40 until such a time that they had reimbursed the full amount. For members that are owing less than $300, should only take a couple of months for them to completely reimburse the arrears. The PSAC has a policy that we do not collect more than the equivalent of 1 year of union dues. So if, for example, during that period of time, if, let's say for the sake of argument, you paid $100 of dues per month, you paid $1,200 per year, you owe the PSAC $2,000 in arrears, we will not collect more than the $1,200, which is what you would have paid in 1 year. So that policy is in application. We won't go back to collect more than what you would have been in arrears for the equivalent of 1 year of union dues. So obviously, we're not going to receive the entire amount of union dues that are owed since March 2016, nor are we going to collect that full amount if people owe more than that 1 year of the equivalent of dues. For members who are going to get, so any questions about that in terms of that process? Nope, see none, okay. So for members who are going to be receiving refunds, if a member's paid the sufficient year-to-date dues, the entire amount owed to the member will be paid in the next pay. So currently the PSAC policy, again, applicable, it's the same policy that applies to refunds that applies to arrears. So the policy in the PSAC is normally we would not reimburse more than the equivalent of what a member would pay in 1 year. However, the National Board of Directors has made a ruling that because of Phoenix, we would modify that policy and we would reimburse members the full amount of additional dues that they paid. So if, using the previous example, somebody would normally have paid $1,200 in 1 year, but they're owed $2,000, we will reimburse them the full amount of $2,000. So those members will be receiving the full refunds. Okay. Any questions on that, on refunds?
How is it year to collect it? Will it come from back to
So no, so the way do, okay, so I think the question was, how will that 1 year amount be collected? And as I said, that will be collected on a monthly basis, no more than what would be twice the amount of monthly dues that you would pay over time until you fully reimburse that amount of money. So using the $1,200 example again, if you, were paying, $100 per month and you owed an additional, or you were paying $80, you should have paid $100. You'll be paying, that amount, that double amount on your first paycheck, and then the normal amount on your second paycheck until such a time that you've reimbursed the full $1,200. Okay. So just in terms of one thing that we should mention, and we're going to be talking about some of the tools that are going to be available to members and to you as pay advocates, who undoubtedly will be getting questions from members regarding the change file. What's important is that members, members should be members in good standing. So the other impact that Phoenix has had is that because we haven't been able to advise the employer of the proper rates of pay, we haven't been able to advise the employer also of changes to members in good standing. So it'll be really important for your members, if there are any questions related to their status as a member in good standing, that they fill out a membership card. And they can do that. There is a form on the PSAC website. There's a link on the PowerPoint presentation that you just saw. If you go to the PSAC website, you'll see that there is a process through which members can fill out basically a membership card to ensure that they're members in good standing. This will also apply for members who have been on periods of leave. So if people have been on extended periods of leave, whether that's maternity leave or sick leave, they will obviously, no longer be a member in good standing. So it'll be important for them to go to the PSAC website, fill out that information so that they can become a member in good standing. Okay. So we've been taking, obviously, we have been undertaking a number of legal actions with the employer in order to fix Phoenix, and obviously to, also fix the problems related to the collection of dues. So we've filed a number of unfair labor practices. We filed an unfair labor practice, basically that the employer was bargaining in bad faith. That was argued in the fall of 2016, and we're awaiting a decision. Many of you may know we filed a mandamus, so it's an action in the federal court that was filed by all of the National Joint Council unions against the employer. We received an interim award, basically that was in our favor. The court has remained seized of that matter, so basically the court has told the parties to go and try and work this out, and they remain seized if there are any challenges in terms of us working things out. And that's what resulted in, as I said, the negotiations around ensuring that there was emergency pay, that there was a reimbursement of any interest or additional costs that were incurred by our members. And as we'll see a little later, one of our demands is also that members receive damages for the impact that Phoenix has had, and that will be, it's obviously part of the negotiations under the auspices of that mandamus that we filed some time ago. Obviously, we filed a multitude of individual and policy grievances on Phoenix. We filed an unfair labor practice based on the employer's failure to implement the collective agreements in a timely fashion. So their inability to implement the economic increases that we negotiated based on the timeframes that had already been negotiated. We filed an unfair labor practice on that. And we filed an unfair labor practice based on union dues, the employer's failure to remit dues on an accurate and consistent basis. So that's also making its way through the Labor Relations Board. So obviously, in terms of what we're looking for, I think, probably many of you have been involved in some of our mobilization efforts around Phoenix and trying to correct this injustice. And I think some of you may be familiar with what our three main asks are in regards to Phoenix. So obviously, we want members to be compensated for the harm that they've suffered. So we want some form of compensation for the duress that our members have suffered through the Phoenix debacle. We're asking for a public inquiry to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I think as a result also of the Auditor General's report, there are a number of recommendations, and we believe that a public inquiry is due to really understand the causes of this and to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself. And finally, we want Phoenix to be fixed. Obviously, we want a pay system that is reliable, that will pay our members on time, every time. So that's basically what our asks are in terms of fighting back on Phoenix. In terms of our key messages to the membership, I mean, we're working obviously nonstop on behalf of our members to make sure that they're paid and that Phoenix is replaced. Phoenix system's been a disaster. Members have been underpaid, overpaid, not paid at all. And you'll find the methods that the PSAC is using to solve the problem on our Here for Canada website. So you'll see there, as I mentioned earlier, some of the concrete actions that we've been able to obtain through our efforts, or both our legal actions, our lobbying efforts, our mobilization efforts, some of the achievements that we've been able to make in regards to Phoenix. The union checkoff has added to the pay problems. We've put pressure on the government to ensure that they fix Phoenix problems and that they pay employees correctly and in a timely manner. There's a petition that members can sign, again, on the Here for Canada website. Again, our objective is to mobilize and to put as much pressure on the employer to try and fix Phoenix on a timely basis and as quickly as possible. So in terms of, just to summarize, there's about 150,000 PSAC members that are affected by paying the incorrect amount of dues. After lengthy delays, the government has brought changes to the system, and finally, we're going to be allowed to correct the amount in dues to be paid as of the paycheck starting November 14th. We're currently in the process of preparing individual letters to go out to every affected member to explain the changes that they'll see. So every member should be getting an individual letter from the PSAC that will indicate the exact amount of dues that they pay and the time frame over which they will be reimbursing those dues if they have arrears. And if they've overpaid in dues, the letter will be indicating the amount of dues that they will be receiving as a refund, and that refund will appear in its entirety on their November 14th paycheck. There are tools that'll be available, and Stephanie will go through those. Obviously, there are tools that'll be available to members in terms of getting additional information on the due situation. We'd encourage you, if members are advising you that they have not received the letter, it's possible that we don't have their current address. So if that's the case, we encourage them, you should be encouraging them to go to the PSAC website, to provide us with their current information, their current addresses, to update their information so that we're able to provide them with the exact information on how much they owe or how much they'll be refunded. Again, there's a frequently asked questions on the PSAC website where many of the members' questions will be asked. There is also a form that members can fill out to have questions answered, but more importantly, if they want information related to their individual circumstances, they'll be able to ask specific questions through the PSAC website, through a form, and we'll provide answers to those questions. And if there are members who are in financial hardship as a result of this, we will be negotiating special arrangements with those individuals. So on the form that's on the PSAC website, there will be a box for them to check off. We'll be dealing with those on a priority basis, but obviously if members are incurring financial hardship, we'll be dealing with those on a case-by-case basis to mitigate the impact of that on our membership. So just to summarize, so I've got a question from Chantal Fortin. What would be the benefit of a public inquiry? I think the benefit would be obviously to figure out exactly what went wrong and how it went wrong. I think, the Auditor General's report talked a bit about the culture in government that allowed this to happen, the fact that some people knew well in advance that there would be significant problems related to Phoenix, and those were not adequately reported, or senior government didn't listen to those concerns and they were not addressed in a timely fashion. So I think part of this would be to clearly identify what went wrong and what could have been corrected to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future. And obviously, if there are systemic reasons that contributed to Phoenix, it would be an opportunity for us and for government to identify those, to address them, and to ensure that they don't occur again. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie for the next part of the presentation, and she'll talk about some of the tools that are available to you as pay advocates and to members who are affected by the arrears or surplus.
Thank you very much, Mark. First, I'm going to ask those of you who have had your hand raised in our box. I know I've answered a couple of your questions already in written form. So if your question is the same as what I've already responded to, please go back in and lower your hand so we don't go to you at the end of the presentation, so that we're not duplicating the answers that we have already provided on the question box. So in regards to the tools, here are some links to what you can find on the website. If you go, just remember PSAC Union, dues, membership, dues. This is the type of information that you're looking for. So if you're doing a search on our website, this is what you're going to be looking for. Frequently asked questions, dues, FAQ. If you require further information on your own situation, this is where you're going to be able to find the form. Please don't start filling in this until you actually get your letter, so that you know what is being asked of you. Okay. Any member having difficulty, they can communicate with the regional office. Hopefully that they're affiliated with, and we will assist you there. Okay. Essentially, we have 3 demands for Phoenix, and those demands are that every member should be compensated, okay, for the harm done to them by Phoenix, the public inquiry, and we want to ensure Phoenix is replaced with an efficient pay system. We know that you're agreeing with these demands, and that it's important that you underline these demands so that we can get as much support as possible, and we can actually lobby the government to make these changes. We hope that this briefing has been helpful for you. I do want to thank Mark. I want to thank Pierre and Lauren, who are behind the scenes helping out. We are now going to go to some other questions, but before I forget, I also need to thank membership administration, because they're the ones who have been doing all of this work in this regard. Okay. So, Roddy, I still see your hand still up, so I'm going to go to you. Roddy, are you there? Roddy? No, that's Robbie. Okay, Robbie, how about you? No, Robbie no longer has a question either. There's a question in the question box. Just let me unpain you. Okay, so Roddy's asking, why is it the PSAC that is going to the members to repay union dues? Okay, PSAC does not have any influence on taxes, CPP, EI, or anything else. We have only PSAC dues. So Roddy wants to know, why is the PSAC going for some refunds?
Well, I think it's important to reiterate that this is money that members should have been paying from March 16th on. I think as Stephanie explained, the employer provides us with data on, the membership, the rates that they're being paid, their classification levels, and we advise them of the multitude of changes in our system. So for example, a member changes department, they go to a different component, a different local, there's a change in the dues that they pay. That's the information we have not been able to provide the employer with since March 2016. So that's what's resulted in a significant shortfall in the dues that we collect. There were discussions on whether we should in fact collect that money. And I think that the important principles to remember are, one, this is money that people owe. This is not additional dues. It's money that members should have been paying. There's also a question of fairness. Other members have paid dues on a consistent basis during that period of time. So it would be unfair for, one member to pay the full amount of dues that they owed for that full period of time, and others basically getting a pass or not paying the correct amount of dues that they should have paid. And I think it's important to point out that we're doing that in a fairly progressive way. As I stated earlier, we're not going to be collecting more than 1 year's worth of dues if you have dues in arrears. If, however, you have a refund, we'll refund that full amount. We're going to recuperate the dues on a extended period of time, so they'll be recaptured on a progressive basis over a longer period of time to minimize the impact of members. And as I said, if there are members who have financial hardship as a result of that, we'll look at those on a case-by-case basis and make individual arrangements with those members, either to extend that period, or there may be instances where we forgive certain repayments.
So I like this question from Eva. How have you ensured that Phoenix will work after November 14th? Are you relying on Phoenix for calculating arrears?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I wish I could give you a 100% guarantee that it's a flawless system, but as Phoenix has pointed out, there are no guarantees. There's always a risk. This is basically, so the technical side of this, and I think Stephanie explained it, is we provide the information that's in the change file that will go to Phoenix and that will be implemented in Phoenix. As I said, we, and when I say we, it's really, we've been working with PWGSC, and PWGSC has done 2 kind of beta tests of the system. So we've inputted the data to see what would happen, and we've brought corrections to that both times we've done it. So we're pretty reassured, and PWGSC is pretty reassured that the system will accept those changes and they'll go through flawlessly. If they're not, then we'll have to readjust that and put a stop to the change file and readjust. But I guess we're fairly confident, and PWGSC is fairly confident that the system will in fact accept the changes and that the amounts will be inputted into Phoenix. Again, we know, as I said, members will be getting an individual letter probably in advance of November 14th, which will advise them of the exact amounts that they owe. So we'll be able to track that as well. If there are huge discrepancies between what we've calculated as what's owed and that's not reflected in Phoenix, we'll pretty quickly know if the system, if there's a problem with the system.
We have several members asking if the presentation is available for them after this, if we can make it available to them. Our document says know that it's confidential. Is that still the case?
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of the questions that are being asked are in the FAQ on the PSAC website. So I would encourage people to go there. You can refer members if they have questions. Obviously, as Stephanie said, the PSAC regional offices will be able to field any questions that members have. There's the form that can be filled out through the PSAC website where we'll be responding to those on a priority basis. We've hired additional resources and membership to be able to deal with the with the number of questions that we're going to be receiving. We've provided training to all of our staff in the organization, and more importantly to the regional offices, to be able to field the more general questions. So I'd encourage people to go there if there are any questions.
So we have a question from Anne-Marie, and it's in regards to a member who is actually owed a large refund. Are they going to be allowed to get the money slowly back instead of in a lump sum so that it doesn't affect their taxes, or will it be arriving in a lump sum and affecting their taxes?
Yeah. My understanding is that it will be a lump sum on their November 14th paycheck, and I believe it's based on the employer system. There isn't another way for us to provide that refund, so we're going to have to do it. But again, that's, I would assume, and I am not, I'm not a tax expert. I would encourage people to consult people who have that expertise, whether because this is in different fiscal years, because the arrears were, occurred between 2016 and 2018, if there's a way of mitigating that. Again, I'm not a tax expert. There may be a way of rationalizing that with CRA, but the information I have is we have to refund those immediately, and the preferred method of doing that is through the payroll system and to refund it on their paycheck.
The next question is in regards to messaging. There are quite a few members who are owed thousands of dollars by the government. They are still not getting paid correctly, and we are now asking them to pay the correct dues. How do we respond to those members when they are asking us, the union hasn't gotten me paid yet, why am I paying correct dues now? Well,
I guess it's not the union that's not getting you paid, it's the Phoenix pay system and the system that the employer and the government has put in place, in spite of us warning them that the system was doomed to failure. We had concerns from the very beginning. I think we've made that clear. We made it clear to government in advance. We made it clear when they implemented Phoenix, and we've been, advocating nonstop, and tirelessly to ensure that we mitigate the impact of Phoenix on our members. The reality is, at one point, this has to be done. It has to be, we have to correct the dues that members owe, and the longer that we take to implement that, the more the problem is going to be compounded. The more those who owe additional money, the more they will owe, and those who are paying too much, they will continue to pay too much, on an ongoing basis. So at some point we have to stop that. We're doing that as of November 14th to stop that process so we can recorrect that. But again, it's money that members owe, and I think that we're recuperating that in a fairly progressive way, as I said, over a longer period of time, not more than 1 year's equivalent of dues, and again, making arrangements for people who might be in financial difficulties as a result of this.
So the next question is an interesting question in that a group of workers were reclassified. They are no longer under PSAC. Will we be going back to those members as well if they would have been in arrears to get their arrears as well?
Yeah, so there is a process through which, and this happens, quite frequently on an individual basis, where people move from one bargaining unit to another, one bargaining agent to another, and there's a process of reconciliation where we reimburse other bargaining agents if we've collected dues on behalf of their members, and they reimburse us if they've collected dues on behalf of our members. So there is a process to reconciliate that. I think there is on the PSAC website. If you go to the frequently asked questions, this situation is addressed specifically in terms of the period. So obviously the period of time that they were in a PSAC bargaining unit we'll be collecting dues for that period of time, but not for any period beyond that. And if those dues were paid inadvertently to another bargaining agent, we'll be reimbursed to that other bargaining agent for those dues.
Just so that you know, we have had a comment in regards to the frequently asked question website that it's difficult to manipulate. So we will take a look at that tomorrow and see if there's a glitch in that website, and see if there's something we can do a bit different for that. Is there a formula that a member can use to calculate what they should have been paying now so they can start looking at it, or do they just have to wait for the letter?
Yeah. It's hard to answer that question because there are so many permutations and possibilities. You know, if a member, you know, was it an acting assignment, if a member changed bargaining units, if a member was on a period of leave, those are all things that affect their dues, or if they changed jobs and are paying dues because a different rate of dues because they belong to a different component or a different local, or if a local implemented any dues increases, those would not have been reflected. So it's hard for us to give a formula. My advice would be to wait for those letters to come. The amount should be exact, and if there are any questions regarding, you know, the amounts that are in that letter, to go to the PSAC website to fill out the form, and we'll be answering those as quickly as possible to provide that information to members.
Why are we implementing the change file in November, right before Christmas, as opposed to waiting until January or February?
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't think there is a good time to do this. I mean, that's one of the reflections we had. We discussed that and came to the conclusion that there's no good time to do this. You know, if we do it now, it is before Christmas. If we did it in January, it's just after Christmas, when people obviously are, you know, have gone through perhaps some Christmas spending and are not in a good position. If we do it in the summer, it's when people are on holidays and would, you know, want to have that additional revenue to spend on their holidays. So basically, there isn't a good time. And as I said, the longer we delay this, the more the problem is compounded, the more members are going to owe, or the more members are going to pay too much. So as I said, there isn't a good time to do it. We thought this was the best time.
So let's take this example here that is being provided by Robbie. He has a member who is being paid as an AS1. They're actually an AS4. They are continually being paid as an AS1. How can we actually calculate those dues when they're still in the pay system as being an AS1?
Yeah, and I think those examples will have to be fixed later when the member's actual pay is fixed. So again, important to note what Stephanie was saying a while ago. These are as a result of changes that occurred in the system towards, you know, for our dues. So there are people who weren't paying the correct amount of dues based on changes within our system. It's not going to fix those arrears for people who haven't been paid the correct amount at this point. I would assume that once those are corrected, so the example that you're providing, at some point that member is going to be paid at the AS4 level. They'll be correctly paid, and they'll be paying dues at the correct level of an AS4. What this will do is, if we have that information that they're an AS4 now, they'll start paying those dues immediately, and then once their salary is readjusted, they'll pay the dues in arrear for that period of time that they were paying dues at the AS1 level, but should have been paying them at the AS4 level. Another important thing, I don't know if we noted that, but then people may know, we collect dues at the first incremental level of people's salary. We don't, so as people progress through the different levels of pay, so the different steps, their dues do not increase. They're always based on the first step of that classification level.
So I have 7:58. We have 2 minutes left to this webinar. Ooh, we've got one question that just popped in. I have no hands raised, and the last question to Chantal. Has the issue that led to collecting the incorrect dues been corrected? So I guess that's, can the compute, what I think you're asking, Chantal, is in the future, will the employer system now be able to talk to the PSAC software database and have that communication that they used to have before March 2016 for the future?
Yeah, that's what should be happening as of November 14th. And as I said, we've done 2 tests of that system. So both times that we tested that, the Phoenix system was able to read the change file. So it's our membership database. It's called Unionware. So the system was able to read that, and we brought corrections to the miscalculations or any issues that there were in that system. So yes, as of November, we've been reassured that the Phoenix system will be able to read our change file.
So I see no further questions on the list. I see no further hands up. So I do want to thank everybody for your participation tonight. Again, a big thank you to Mark for joining us this evening, Pierre and Lauren, and of course, membership administration for actually putting together all of this really, really hard work. Again, if you have questions that come to you later on, please feel free to contact your regional office. The reps there have all received training and should be able to answer your questions. And if we can't answer them, we can definitely try and find an answer for you and get back to you at a later date. So again, thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks.